On January 3rd, 2026, the United States executed what may become the defining military operation of the 21st century. In approximately 3 hours, Operation Absolute Resolve dismantled Venezuela's government, captured President Nicolás Maduro, and secured the country's oil infrastructure. This wasn't a prolonged campaign. It was surgical, decisive, and faster than any comparable military intervention in modern history. To understand why it happened and what it means for global power dynamics, we need to examine both the decades-long crisis that preceded it and the 3 hours that changed everything. Venezuela's collapse didn't begin in 2026. By the time Operation Absolute Resolve launched, the country had endured more than a decade of hyperinflation, mass immigration, and state failure. What was once Latin America's wealthiest nation had seen its economy contract by over 75% since 2013. More than 7 million Venezuelans had fled the country. The Maduro government maintained control through military loyalty, Russian and Chinese support, and systematic repression. Despite international sanctions, diplomatic isolation, and U.S.-backed opposition governments, Maduro remained in power. Traditional pressure tactics had failed to dislodge the regime. By late 2025, the stalemate had calcified. Venezuela's humanitarian crisis continued to destabilize neighboring countries. And crucially, Venezuela's oil sector, which holds the world's largest proven reserves, remained offline, contributing to global energy instability. The United States had exhausted every tool short of direct military intervention. And the calculation changed on January 3rd. Operation Absolute Resolve began at approximately 5:47 a.m., with simultaneous strikes on Venezuela's air defense system and military communications. Within minutes, Venezuelan command and control capabilities were neutralized. Radar installations, communication towers, and key military headquarters were destroyed or rendered inoperable. The speed wasn't accidental. It was the entire strategy. U.S. forces created what military analysts call decision paralysis. By the time Venezuelan leadership understood they were under attack, they had lost the ability to coordinate a response. At 6:15 a.m., Special Operations Forces moved on multiple targets simultaneously. The presidential palace, key government buildings, and residences of top commanders were all hit within 30 minutes. Nicolás Maduro was captured at approximately 7:32 a.m. Why didn't the Venezuelan military fight back? First, the operation moved faster than Venezuela's decision-making cycle. Second, the armed forces had been hollowed out by corruption and defections. Third, internal fragmentation meant no unified command could mount organized resistance once communications were disabled. By 9 a.m., the operation's primary objectives were complete. While Maduro's capture dominated headlines, the operation's most consequential element was the simultaneous securing of Venezuela's oil infrastructure. U.S. forces immediately established control over PDVSA facilities, refineries, and key export terminals. This was central to the operation's strategic logic. Venezuela sits on approximately 303 billion barrels of proven oil reserves, the largest in the world. Its mismanagement and sanctions had kept this capacity offline for over a decade, contributing to global price volatility. By securing these assets within hours, the United States prevented infrastructure destruction and signaled to global markets that Venezuelan oil could potentially return to international supply. Oil futures dropped nearly 8% on speculation that production could be restored. Whether this constitutes occupation or stabilization remains debated, but the strategic intent is clear: prevent chaos, secure resources, stabilize markets. The operation's most striking feature may be what didn't happen: direct confrontation with Russia or China. Both countries had invested heavily in Venezuela, billions in loans, oil contracts, and military equipment. Yet neither mounted a meaningful response to the U.S. operation, when the reasons are strategic. Russia, committed in Ukraine and facing economic constraints, had little appetite for confrontation in the Western Hemisphere. China, despite its investments, historically avoids military intervention outside its immediate periphery. Both issued diplomatic protests but took no concrete action. For U.S. policymakers, this represents a critical data point. Rapid, decisive action can succeed without triggering great power conflict, at least under specific conditions. Whether this emboldens similar operations elsewhere will define the next era of international relations. The operation has fundamentally altered calculations about American resolve and the limits of deterrence. Ending a regime is not the same as building a state. Venezuela now faces the fundamental question, what comes next? The collapse removed the only functioning national authority, however dysfunctional. Venezuela's institutions were already hollowed out before January 3rd. Now they are essentially non-existent. Regional powers, Brazil, Colombia, Mexico, all have stakes in Venezuelan stability, given migration flows and border security. But none have the capacity to lead reconstruction. Venezuela needs functioning police, courts, public services, and economic institutions. It needs to reintegrate millions of refugees and establish legitimate authority in areas that have been effectively stateless for years. History offers cautionary examples. Rapid regime change in Iraq, Libya, and Afghanistan created power vacuums far more difficult to manage than the military operations themselves. The 3-hour war succeeded militarily. And the stabilization ahead is the harder question. Operation Absolute Resolve represents a new doctrine that swift, overwhelming force can achieve regime change without prolonged occupation. Whether it's a sustainable model or a tactical success, masking strategic uncertainty remains to be seen. The operation proved the United States still possesses unmatched military capability. It didn't prove that military power alone can resolve the underlying conditions that produce the crisis. Venezuela's 3-hour war is over. The question of what Venezuela becomes next has only just begun.